Thank you. You are not here right now. You are in another room. This is how you get there. We check our phones every 12 minutes, 80 times per day. 44% of adults say they are anxious when they're away from their phones for a long period of time. How many conversations, feeds, and apps are you inside right now? How many other rooms? These rooms have rules, and those rules can undermine democracies. My name is Tobias Rose-Stockwell. I wrote a book about how tech amplifies discontent, how it undermines democracies, and what we can do about it. I wrote an article in The Atlantic with Jonathan Haidt about the dark psychology of social networks. In this talk, I want to describe 3 dynamics about how these tools affect us. The first is about how viral stories outcompete verified facts, about how public performance has become the new norm of communication, and about threats to identities and how they become actionable fears. The first is hypervirality. Frictionless sharing has allowed for us to press a single button and spread information to all of our friends, which is the magical thing. But it's also massively amplified the speed and spread of emotional outrage. This information expands outwards in outrage cascades that we cannot ignore. These are packages of emotion that go on to spread amongst our friends, families, and strangers. Why does this happen? It turns out moral and emotional language has a 17% boost per word used. Words like lie, anger, shame, disgust. These words create a natural boost to the engagement of our posts online. We pay attention to them. But it's not just outrageous content. You may know this famous quote by Mark Twain: "A lie gets halfway around the world before the truth has a chance to put on its pants." This is in fact false. Mark Twain never said this. But a 2019 study out of MIT shows that false information has a 5 times advantage in spread in these social networks over true information. But even in regular conversations, truth is hard. We are wrong before we are right. But our species has a superpower. We have the ability to check the biases and claims of other people and see the flaws in arguments that we cannot see on our own. The result, when this is done in good faith, is better information for all of us. Now imagine taking that conversation and erecting grandstands on either side and putting people in those grandstands that are carefully examining each word you say. We feel beholden to the gaze of these people, these friends, these followers, these strangers. Now imagine receiving valuable metrics of acclaim every time we appeal to the biases of our audience. Truth becomes a casualty. Instead, we morally grandstand. Instead, we publicly perform. This is what these tools do. Now, the original point of these metrics was actually a positive point. Justin Rosenstein, the creator of the like button, he said, "I wanted to make positivity the path of least resistance." Likes and follows are great metrics for us as individuals. We feel good when we receive them. They're cheap to give away, but they're valuable to receive. They're an easy and egalitarian way of up-leveling content. They're a great signal for developers and designers to know what you're really interested in. But while we think we're simply passing on positivity, we're actually training each other. B.F. Skinner, a famous psychologist in the 1930s, he did studies on rats, showing you put a rat in a box, you give them a flashing light and a button to press. Every time they press the button after the light flashes, they get a piece of food and they get addicted to that process. But after a while, if the rewards were consistent, the rats would get bored. So if you add randomness to that process, the light flashes, sometimes you get a reward, sometimes you don't. It hacked the rats' brains. They would go crazy. They would become obsessed with trying to figure out the pattern. This is what we have done with our apps, feeds, and notifications. We have trained each other to become obsessed with this process of trying to get metrics. Another industry figured this out long ago. You can put people into a room, give them a flashing light, tell them to press a button, and they will become obsessed and addicted and give away fortunes. Here's one quick example from someone that you might know. Let's go way back to 2011. Trump was a game show host. Before that, he was a Democrat, then he was an independent, then he was a Republican. He's always been interested in getting media attention. Back then, you can look at these numbers, he averaged about 20 to 30 likes per post, and maybe 30 or 40 retweets. But something strange happened in July of 2011. He posted a tweet about Barack Obama being a radical. It received 2,000 retweets, 3,000 likes. Suddenly, this was signal for him, and he began to post more outrageous content. Soon after, he said Barack Obama was selling guns to Mexican drug lords, also received 2,000 retweets and 3,000 likes. And you can see from this point how he regularly began to change his attitude and his posting in order to become more outrageous, more extreme. So core to this is a story about content and about how content comes to resemble threats. It all comes down to identity. Each one of these posts that was more extreme, that is like an identity threat to some group of people. It's a threat to maybe me, it's a threat to someone else. We all have many identities: cultural, professional, religious, regional. And when we're in certain contexts, identities go to the back or they come to the fore. If I'm at a political event, my political identity becomes very salient, and I'll feel very strongly about being a Democrat or Republican. But when these identities are threatened, something very strange happens. We do a predictable thing. We begin venerating the in-group of our identity and denigrating the out-group that is threatening. Our identities become rigid, they become solid, immovable objects. They become very deep and salient to us. Even more strange, in times of heightened threats, it begins to change the way our politics works too. We begin, when we are afraid, to give up our rights to stay safe. We look to the strong men and the strong women who support our politics by force. This is an authoritarian default that happens in times of increased threats. Viral networks create an information environment that prioritizes threats. That is what social media does. So this is what happens in times of heightened virality. Viral networks are inherently unstable. They default to confusion, chaos, and sometimes violence. People form identities around the cultural and ethnic identities that feel threatened to them. And some people try to exploit this. They gain audiences and followings. they sometimes default into authoritarian networks. When an authoritarian builds a strong enough following, they can shut down dissent. They can curtail conversation, and they can make things worse for all of us. An authoritarian network is a system in which speech is dictated by a central authority with criminal punishments for dissent. Or sometimes, with the right set of actions and conditions, we can turn these viral networks into knowledge networks. We have been here before. In the past, every time we've seen a major new media technology, we've had an increase in virality, and we've had to protect ourselves and our institutions. This happened when the cheap printing presses came into the fore in the 1800s in America and Europe. It happened when the telegraph contributed huge quantities of viral misinformation that contributed to the Civil War. And it happened with the radio and television, when we had a new type of fascism that emerged as a result of these tools in the middle of the last century. So recognizing we are in a viral network right now, teetering on chaos, what can we do to make sure it changes into a knowledge network? We know what these systems look like. We are fortunate. We all grew up in the midst of these networks. Systems like science, academia, and journalism all emerged as tools to help us parse good information from bad. They have features that are legible to us. They include individuals and institutions with clear reputational risks, calling each other out in good faith. So what are the steps we can take today? Fortunately, at every level, from the government to the platform to the individual, there's much we can do. At the government level, there's a fantastic piece of legislation that's being worked on right now called the Platform Accountability and Transparency Act, which works to make the harms of social media companies more legible to academia and civil society, so we can account for exactly how they are influencing democracies. At the platform level, we can draw examples from existing systems that we rely upon every day. Wikipedia is something we use regularly. It is a knowledge network. It is designed to let claims, citations, and refutations live in open view for everyone. It's not perfect, but studies show that it's as accurate as historical encyclopedias were, and it's available to everyone, and it's free. It has a deeply democratic design that helps us find better information. We can even see the beginnings of features on social media platforms that might become knowledge networks. Community Notes is a tool that allows for X users, formerly Twitter, to add additional information and deeper context and call out falsehoods as a community when they see them spreading widely online. We can also reduce the social pressures around moral grandstanding by turning off the metrics. We can hide the metrics that force us to perform publicly. We can reduce the pressure to be seen as right by turning these off visibly. Less gladiatorial combat in online discussions. It reduces the popularity contest. And finally, as individuals in a viral network, we actually have tremendous power. We have leverage. Remember that outrage cascade from the beginning? That originated with one person. Every person who decides not to create or contribute to an outrage cascade can actually turn down the volume, remove themselves from the fray. And if we reduce our personal triggers, we can avoid getting trapped by the outrage machine. When we're tired, when we're angry, when we're unhappy, that is when these tools get us. That is when we are our worst selves. We can choose to reduce our triggers in those moments. There's an app that I use regularly that forces me to take a deep breath every time I enter into a website that I'm addicted to. It's called 1 Sec, and I highly recommend it. This moment is critical. It's up to us to fix these systems. We have a choice. We can turn down the intensity of these platforms. We can help transition these tools into the knowledge networks that we deserve, the ones that support our thoughtfulness, our better angels, and our democracies. Thank you.